Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the African Exodus show. I am your host, Tierney Cherie, here to you with another show. I want to first get started with African news, but before I do, I want to remind you, if you have not already, please do subscribe to my Telegram group where I live stream from, where I post updates and communicate with the people most often from. You could do that by clicking the link that is in your description. So with that, let's get started with African and world news. First Republic Bank collapses. Now, this is something that many people saw coming because recently we had the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, and now, a month later, we have another bank that has collapsed. What does that mean for us, people of African descent? What does that mean for people who are oppressed? Well, let's find out. First Republic collapse sparks regional bank shares sell-off. Shares of several regional lenders have fallen on Monday after the collapse of First Republic Bank, the third major casualty of the biggest crisis to hit the banking sector in the United States since 2008. The banking turmoil erupted from the closure of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in March, causing depositors to flee regional lenders and driving fears that the crisis could engulf other mid-sized banks. The KBW Regional Banking Index shed 2.7% on Monday, hitting a session low, while shares of Citizen Financial Group, PNC Financial Services Group, Truist Financial Corp., and U.S. Bank Corp. Fell between 3% and 7%. Valley National Bank Corp., which owns Valley National Bank, lost more than 20%. A deal was announced earlier on Monday that allows for an orderly failure of First Republic. Under the terms, J.P. Morgan Chase will pay $10.6 billion to the U.S. Federal Deposit Insurance Corp., which took First Republic into receivership for most of the failed bank's assets. The article goes on to say that this marks the second largest failure on records. Still, unlike Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, the FDIC had a buyer waiting in the wings. And so this is not going to appear as though it's as bad as the last bank failure that we've seen happen. However, please understand that when it comes to these types of FDIC maneuvers, when you have the insurance back jump in and give some type of assurance to people who have their money deposited in these banks, that's not something that is really going to be of much help when we see more banks start collapsing, because even for the FDIC, there's not enough money that they have. No matter how much they tell you that your money is safe, your money is safe. Well, your money is safe as long as they have money. However, if all the major banks collapse in the United States, is that going to help you whenever the FDIC cannot even insure every single person? Well, of course it wouldn't. So that's a false way to make people feel secure even when you're not secure. But I want to go to another article that discusses this bank failure. U.S. banks are failing and the authorities seem unlikely to intervene. Shares in more than 2 U.S. regional banks have been suspended. Regulators moved in to halt trading in Los Angeles-based PacWest and Arizona Western Alliance on Thursday after they became the latest victims of an escalating crisis that began with Silicon Valley Bank back in March. The message from central banks and bank supervisors is that this is not a return of the global financial crisis of 2008. We're going to keep hearing about 2008 because this was the last time where the entire world was pulled into a crisis because of the United States. Now, there's warning in telling us that it's not as bad as 2008. And their reason is because, with the exception of Switzerland's Credit Suisse, European banks have escaped the turmoil. It is specific U.S. banks that are the problem. So that is something significant. You're seeing other banks not being affected by the fact that the United States seems to be having a banking collapse. What that tells you is that we're moving into a world where the U.S. dollar, the U.S. system of finance is not going to be determinative of the rest of the world. If you need more information on that, you could watch the session I did on the U.S., the fact that the United States is falling as an empire. Now, it goes on and says there are a number of reasons for that. The business models of banks concern, failures of regulation, the large number of small and mid-sized banks in the U.S., and the rapid increase in interest rates from the country's central bank, the Federal Reserve, all of these are causes or attributors to the banking collapse. They said unless the Fed rides to the rescue with cuts in the interest rate, we know the Fed has been instead increasing the interest rate and not cutting it. The options are amalgamation, regulation, or more banks going to bust. The response of the U.S. authorities suggests little appetite for a laissez-faire approach. The U.S. authorities certainly do not seem adverse to further amalgamation. When First Republic ran into trouble, it was seized by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and its deposits and its assets were sold to one of the giants of U.S. banking, J.P. Morgan and Chase. Inevitably, there will be more takeovers and fire sales of assets as alternatives to bank failures. It's reasonable to assume that in 10 years' time, the number of U.S. banks will be considerably smaller than it is today. Think about the previous story we just did, talking about who came to the rescue. J.P. Morgan and Chase, a bank that has been in power for a long time, a bank that has deep state alliances, deep state connections, are very well ingrained in the establishment bank, comes to the rescue of a smaller bank. This article was alluding to the fact that very soon there's only going to be a handful of banks, and these are the banks that are already running the world, but now they don't have to do it in the shadows. They can essentially be out in the open as far as being the one and only, as far as most of the transactions happening in the U.S. One might even think that someday we'll be going directly to the Federal Reserve for our currency. That's something that's also being discussed as a possibility. Now, how is this affecting African people? How is this affecting us throughout the world? The article gives some assurances that this is not like 2008. The reason is because while the United States seems to be suffering, other countries are not. But one thing that it doesn't talk about, and the next article also does mention this, is that while the banks are not collapsing in other countries, if the U.S. banks do collapse and if U.S. is sent through a recession, that absolutely will have a worldwide impact. That's when you will see the impact to every single person, not just in the United States, in Europe, not just in Europe, even places like Africa. You're going to see an effect, a domino effect, just like we've seen in 2008. Because when the U.S. has a cough, the whole world gets sick, right? So this is the reality that we're in. Now, we as African people have to know that this system is collapsing very quickly, and I say very quickly because we see things exacerbating at a very rapid speed. Do not look away whenever you see banks collapsing. That's a mistake that many of us make. We think that because we don't see it in our bank, or we don't see our accounts, we don't see us being the ones who are suffering, we think that these things are far and distant. That's what they rely on, basically you being in the matrix and thinking that your day-to-day celebrity news, your day-to-day sports commentary, your day-to-day Twitter feeds, that's your reality. No, the reality is happening, and whether or not you're ready to face it, it's going to happen at rapid speed. So for that reason, it's important for us to be prepared. Interestingly enough, I did run into this one article that alluded to Black people, particularly, that we needed to be concerned about what's happening with these bank collapses. And this is an interesting news article that just flashed up on yahoo.com. And I thought it was interesting because of all people to write an article about with this financial collapse, they chose to write this article about us. So let's read through this. The U.S. is on the brink of a financial crisis. Black Americans should be concerned. This is written by The Root, by the way. So it says, not to be dramatic, but hearing the news that the United States could be on the brink of a financial disaster in a few weeks was not exactly how we'd hoped to kick off the month. On Monday, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced that the United States could run out of money to meet our obligations as soon as June 1st. That means for the first time in our country's history, we could end up defaulting on our debt, which is a big problem if you enjoy not being in the midst of another Great Recession. Despite knowing for months that the United States had officially hit the debt ceiling, which is $31 trillion, we still don't have a deal to raise the limit. For folks wondering why that's such a problem, we'll break it down as simply as possible. The debt limit is the amount of money the federal government can borrow to meet their existing funding obligations. That includes Medicare, Social Security, loan payments, and Congress regularly votes to increase this limit so that we can borrow, we, the United States, could borrow more and keep paying our bills, including our national debts. Now, before I go into the article, I want to hit on a few points. Number one, as they said, this is going to affect Medicare, Social Security, and loan payments. Probably also a lot of things that are affecting you, right? This is going to cripple people who rely on the government for help. And they know this. That's why they're not talking about it so much in the news, or that's why they're trying to downplay it. That's why you'll see CNN focused on Trump's indictments and not on the economy. Because the fact is that if you realize that you rely on systems, or that your relatives, your grandma, your mother relies on these systems, and if these systems are on the brink of collapse, you might become alarmed. Now, it's important to also understand, though, that this thing has been a long time coming. Every single year this happens, the debt ceiling gets raised. The debt ceiling gets raised. There's always going to be a deal. And by the way, I do think more than likely, probably the night before, if not hours before the U.S. defaults on its debt, that Congress will probably reach a deal. That's what usually happens just right before they're about to default on their debt, because no politician wants to be sitting in office whenever the U.S. economy disappears from the earth. But regardless of that, understand that's literally just kicking the can down the road. Eventually, the debt in the United States is going to be a real problem, and it's coming very quickly and very soon. Not just the fact that the debt is becoming more and more high, but also the fact that it's basically owned by economies that are adverse to the United States. For example, we know that the United States wants to incite war with China. What happens with the fact that most of their debt is owned by China? What happens when China pulls that trigger alarm saying pay up now? Is the United States people going to be inside of a good situation then? Of course not, because basically you're going to see another situation. That's when a creditor demands payment. So we're not inside of a stable position, no matter what the politicians are telling us, no matter what solutions they're giving us. Even if they do raise the debt ceiling, it doesn't mean that our problems are going to disappear. If anything, they become more exacerbated the more and more this debt continues to increase without a plan to actually pay it back. So let's go on and read this article. So it goes on to say, unfortunately, this isn't the kind of crisis Black Americans can afford to ignore. Emphasize, we cannot afford to ignore this. A deep recession would, in all likelihood, be devastating for Black Americans. Studies have shown that Black Americans are generally among the first groups to be laid off when unemployment is high and the slowest demographic to recover after a recession. Going to repeat that again. We are generally the first group to be laid off, and we are generally the slowest demographic to recover after a recession. Black Americans would be disproportionately harmed if the government can no longer fund social welfare programs, including Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Just take Social Security, for example. A 2017 study found that 35% of elderly married Black couples and 58% of unmarried Black older adults relied on Social Security for 90% of their income. Now, House Republicans have passed a bill to raise the debt limit. However, they included a bunch of spending cuts and new work requirements for people receiving government benefits, including food programs such as SNAP, meaning food stamps are on the chopping block right now. The bill is unlikely to go anywhere since President Joe Biden is currently pushing for Congress to raise the limits without extracting any concessions. Is that going to go forward? Is Joe Biden actually going to get them to pass and increase the debt limit without any concessions? I personally doubt that, but we're going to see how this plays out. More than likely, both sides are going to compromise and things will appear to go back to normal as they usually do. The concern you should have is that while this is happening, while war is happening, while the banks are collapsing, the United States has put us inside of a situation where those of us who might genuinely need help are now now watching the tide turn against the U.S.'s favor. And we're locked into a situation where if the system goes down, many of us will unfortunately go down with it. The other irony in this, however, is that while this is happening to us, we're being told to watch sports. We're being told to watch celebrity news. We're being told to talk about things that have nothing to do with our condition. So this is why we have to make sure we're vigilant in understanding what is happening inside of the economy, because if not, you're probably not prepared. Hopefully you take this story as a signal and a sign that you need to be making preparations for what's going to happen next. In Britain, people were preparing for the coronation of King Charles, a part of the British royal family, a part of the family that controls a lot of things behind the scenes that you might not be privy to. But it's an elitist family, a family that is a part of the real establishment, the one that you see and the one that you don't see. Many people, again, they're not happy about King Charles being King Charles. Unfortunately, they didn't have that same energy for Queen Elizabeth being Queen Elizabeth. Like, she actually didn't sit on the chair and watch colonized people being massacred all over the world. No, they let her go with that because she was Queen Elizabeth. King Charles might not get away with those same things, however. Now, something that has come out is a lot of people using this as a time to protest the British monarchy and their genocidal, murderous campaigns throughout the world. And we're going to talk about that. This story, it says, King Charles is urged to acknowledge the British Empire's legacy of genocide. Ahead of the coronation of King Charles III, Indigenous and other advocacy groups from 12 British Commonwealth countries have called on the new British monarch to, on the date of his coronation, acknowledge the horrific impacts on and the legacy of genocide and colonization of the indigenous and enslaved people. They want him to do this on the day of his coronation. King Charles maintains the official head of state for members of the British Commonwealth, a group of countries that were part of Britain's former colonial empire. And for context, even though they're not technically a part of the empire, they're still a part of the British colonial system. They're still beholden to Charles. They still fall in line with a lot of the protocols and the laws of the British Commonwealth system. And so even though colonialism has on paper been eradicated, in many ways it's still a literal colonial relationship playing out before us. Now it says in the letter dated on May 4th, representatives from organizations from Antigua, Barbuda, Australia, Bahamas, Belize, Canada, Grenada, Jamaica, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines call on King Charles to immediately commit to starting discussions about reparations, repatriating remains, and returning cultural artifacts. I'm just going to tell y'all right now, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We have to get out of having reparations conversations where someone's being given the option. What you want to be in a situation is when a person doesn't have an option, when a person is having their backs against the wall and they realize they have no choice. That's not what's going to happen inside of this situation because, frankly, he'll do what he always does. That is ignore the noise, be quiet, stay away from those who are too woke, too loud, too activist-ish, whatever. He'll stay away from those types of people, those types of reporters, and he'll do what he always does. Ignore the plights of people who suffered from his empire and pretend that everything is fine and well. So just to let you all know, that's not going to happen. But let's say, we stand united in engaging a process to right the wrongs of the past and continue the process of decolonization, the letter says. And the process of decolonization does not begin or end or start with apologies, if that's what they're trying to achieve. But for some reason, we live in a day and a world where people think apologies actually mean something to the oppression of people. It doesn't mean anything to apologize. What means something is actually having the power to enforce your rights. And we don't have the power to enforce our rights when someone else controls our rights. They said we stand united in engaging a process to right the wrongs of the past. I think I read that. It goes on to say we are united in our struggle to create a world free of vestiges of racism and oppression that still pervade today in our direct legacy of the dehumanization of our first peoples and enslaved peoples that has occurred throughout the colonial era. Nova Paris, a former Australian senator and co-chair of the Australia Republican movement, who signed the letter, said in a statement that the group was looking to King Charles for an apology, reparation, and repatriation of our artifacts and our remains, and to acknowledge the horrific and enduring impacts of the legacy of genocide, colonization of the indigenous and enslaved peoples as well. That's a lot that they're looking for from Charles, but unfortunately, like I said, it's not going to happen. So my question to those who are protesting, my question to those who have those lists of demands is that when he does, not if he does, when he does ignore your calls for justice, what are you going to do next? And you should always have a what are you going to do next? Because what they rely on is you going to the next issue, and then basically they get to push you to the side while they continue to hold power over you. But this is what's happening, and this is what the conversation is. Unfortunately, not much will change, but we do know that what will continue to happen is the push for true justice and equality, true justice as far as the things that have been done to our people, and to equality as far as not having our power determined by those who have been adverse to us. That will never end, and that fight will never die until we actually do get true justice, not some fake reparations that are going to silence us until we go to the next issue. But with that, I want to talk a lot about the story of Haiti. Haiti is on the brink of civil war. It's being reported that Haiti is on the brink of civil war. This is an article from Al Jazeera saying Haiti is on the brink of civil war. The humanitarian group Mercy Corps has warned as violence between criminal gangs and civilian risk spiraling. Before I finish or continue reading, I would definitely love to hear from people on the ground as far as, is this the actual thing that's happening on the ground in Haiti? Or are these claims being overblown? Because from the coverage, it does look like something serious is happening. So would love some more context from anyone who has more information to give. But what's being reported is that there's escalating violence, particularly in the capital of Port-au-Prince, where gangs have taken over large parts of the city. Families are losing access to basic necessities, including food and clean water, the group added. I don't trust the Mercy Corps. So again, please do give us information from the ground, or those of you who have connections to people on the ground. The population has been pushed to make impossible decisions, like choosing between taking children to a hospital or a health clinic to treat cholera at risk of being at the risk of being kidnapped and killed, or stay home and hoping that things will get better. Jules added that many residents are starting to question why not seek revenge and take justice into their own hands. Last week, supposedly there's footage of this online. I have not watched it, will not watch this, but they said last week a mob lynched at least 13 gang members who have been arrested in Port-au-Prince. Haiti's de facto prime minister, Ariel Henry, has faced a crisis of legitimacy because he's not legitimate. Him, as well as the previous president, Moise, both of them are sitting in a seat that was not elected or chosen by the people. Both of them are chosen by the United States and the United States elite. None of them are representative of the people. He's illegitimate. He was chosen for the post by Moise just days before the president was killed. What a coincidence. Presidential and legislative elections have been postponed indefinitely since 2021, preventing any political transitions. Mercy Corps, which provides cash assistance to tens of thousands of people in Haiti, said on Monday that nearly half of the country's population is starving because of this crisis. Now, assuming that what's being reported in the news by a number of sources is true, this is obviously not a good situation. This is not an ideal situation, and this is an unfortunate situation because, once again, the people of Haiti have suffered so much, particularly from the imperialist and colonialist systems that have had their foot on our people's necks, continually. Haiti represents liberation. Haiti represents us being able to rule ourselves, us being able to be separate from this system. That's what Haiti represented. But because they wanted to be separate, they had to suffer the most. And that's why Haiti has become this example of what it is that will happen to you if you seek liberation and don't get it through us, don't get some surface level liberation, but you actually force the hand of your oppressor to let you go. If you do that, then you will be punished. And to this day, they still punish Haiti for killing their colonial oppressors. And our people suffer for it. Definitely keeping our thoughts, prayers, and really our solidarity with the people of Haiti, because what they continue to suffer because of the colonial governments is just reprehensible. This will probably try to be used. Hopefully it won't be successful, but this will probably try to be used by entities like the United Nations to have another intervention. We know the United States recently did an intervention in Haiti. We know that the United Nations has been eyeing Haiti for a while, trying to use justification to go back in with their Peace Corps. Hopefully that does not happen, but we know that that's what they're eyeing to do. So certainly we'll keep our eyes and our hearts with Haiti, because we have to not let go of the fact that people are actively trying to derail their freedom. By the way, on March 24th, the United States, the White House of the president, had released a fact sheet where they explained their policy towards a number of countries. These countries include coastal West Africa, Haiti, Libya, Mozambique, Papua New Guinea. So I want to just briefly read what their plan, their publicly stated plan is for the island nation. They should not have a plan for Haiti, right? Because they've done so much destruction already. But this is what the United States put out. They said, in Haiti, the United States aims to foster stabilization in communities impacted by violence while systematically addressing underlying drivers of conflict over time and mitigating the impact of future climate shocks. The United States aims to build on mechanisms for consultation with a broad range of Haitian stakeholders to support locally driven peace and stability. I just wanted to add this quick excerpt to the story because the narrative of the media really does matter. The narrative of the media right now is that things are so violent that everything's out of hand. Haiti's basically in a civil war. Now, if that is or if that isn't the case, if it is the case, it could very much be the case that those types of conflicts and violence is being incited by outside governments to basically give them the right or give them the perceived right to invade a country. But it could also be that the media is just overblowing things. Regardless of what it is, the United States has this beautiful plan laid out that they're going to work to end the impact on communities of violence. And of course, this is what they're using this story to back up. So this is another area that you want to be very, very careful with, whether you're peddling the imperialist narratives. And that's why we rely on people on the ground to give us the full story. This is an interesting story not a lot of people are talking about. Pope Francis has sacked a 64-year-old clergyman of Rwandan descent. His name is Wenceslas Monyeshyaka. So sorry, people in Rwanda, because I know I butchered that, but I tried my best. And he has been serving as a priest inside of France for close to 30 years. Now, the Bishop of Urvo issued a communique, which has been circulating online, stating that Munyeshayaka is excluded from continuing to serve as a priest anywhere else and automatically loses his clerical rights. Well, what did he lose them for? Well, the authenticity of the communique was confirmed by the Office of the Diocese of Urvo to the BBC, and it was revealed that the decision was based on a papal decree dating back to March. Yeshyaka, who fled to France following the Rwandan genocide in 1994, has not commented on the decision. In December of 2021, he was subpoenaed by his diocese after it was revealed that he had legally acknowledged fathering a 10-year-old boy. He had a child, and for some reason, people still follow the Catholic Church's decrees that celibacy is serving God in some way. Now, this is an interesting part of the story, though. So this is why they're going after him, because he has a child that's 10 years old. But Mr. Munyashiyaka was ordained a priest in Rwanda in 1992, where he is accused of playing a role in the killings of hundreds of Tutsis who had fled to his church in the capital, Kigali, during the genocide. So he is accused, and there seems to be a lot of evidence that he is an accessory, a person who actually helped in the killing of hundreds of innocent people. He went to court in France, but he was cleared of genocide charges. Now, of course, the question is how crazy it is. I mean, for the Catholic Church to be willing to have someone inside of their organization who is accused of genocide, yet at the same time, that's not enough to get him removed from his position. Having a 10-year-old child is, though. It's very crazy, and that made me actually want to look more into this man. So I did go to his Wikipedia page, and I found it says he was a Rwandan priest, again working in France. He was convicted of genocide by a Rwandan military court. He was pursued in the French courts, but in October 2015, the case was not continued because of the quality of evidence. Despite the controversy in his Rwandan conviction, he has been employed as a priest in France since 2001. Going on, it says that he was responsible for Saint Famille Church and Parish in Kigali. A military tribunal in Rwanda found him guilty of rape and involvement in the 1994 genocide and sentenced him in absentia to life in prison. I want to repeat that. He was found guilty of rape. He raped someone, according to Rwandan courts. And also, he was a person who participated in the genocide. And this person fled to France, where he's been a priest this whole time. But they don't want to remove him from the Catholic Church organization for these things, for being found guilty of rape and being found guilty of genocide. They want to step in because he had a child. Okay. The military tribunal, I think I read that part. No, okay, I did not, sorry. Go back. He was found to have delivered hundreds of adults and children to genocidal militias, which brutally slaughtered them. The military tribunal found that Munyashiyaka guilty of rape and of aiding militias in the killing of hundreds of Tutsi refugees at the Holy Family Cathedral in downtown Kigali, where he was the head priest. Oof. In October 2015, the French government expressed disappointment that the French courts had decided to not progress the case any further. The Catholic Church employed him as a priest, despite all of this, and yet again he was excommunicated for having a child. This is just some foolishness, and the fact that it makes me want to question, what are his ties? What are his deep state ties? The fact that this man really was accused of the most heinous acts that you could probably be accused of in the world. And yet this organization, like many other people who are accused in their organization, basically just swept these under the rug and pretended like it didn't happen and kept him in his post. That really makes me think he has some type of ties and that there's something really else going on behind the scenes. This is all speculation, but I do want to hear your thoughts on this crazy and horrible story. What are your thoughts on why it is that this was essentially the straw that broke the camel's back as far as his affiliation with the Catholic Church? Now, this story is crazy, and it's crazy because it shows us how quickly things are changing in the world and how quickly the world is falling into chaos. Now, if you did not hear, Russia has accused Ukraine of trying to assassinate Vladimir Putin. Maybe you just think that this is just another installment of the war, just another accusation, things will go past, but this is being seen as an open and direct threat that the Ukrainians did completely against the Russian government, meaning, all hands on deck. We're going to do what we have to do to basically get rid of y'all. Let's look at this story. This is being reported by WION. They said, no choice but to physically eliminate Zelensky. That's what Russia said after a drone assassination attempt. After Russia alleged that Vladimir Putin was targeted by Ukraine in a drone assassination attack, the deputy chairman of the country's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, on Wednesday called for the killing You hear me? They're calling for the killing of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He said there are no other options left other than the physical elimination of the Ukrainian president. That is strong words, and that really shows you the point we're at. We're at a tipping point right now as far as what's happening. Now, he went on to say he gave a warning to Zelensky on Wednesday on his Telegram channel. He wrote, "After today's terrorist attack, there are no options left other than the physical elimination of Zelensky and his clique." He said, "It is not even needed for signing an instrument of unconditional surrender. Hitler, as is known, did not sign it either. There will always be some substitute." So this is a very significant escalation because essentially this means that Russia will not in any type of way negotiate peace with Ukraine, which, by the way, was a possibility a year ago. They were very open to negotiating peace, but because of instigators, i.e. the United States, that did not happen. Now, we want to go to what the U.S. has, the allegations against the United States as far as this attack. So the U.S. has rejected Russia's ludicrous claim that it was behind an alleged attack on the Kremlin, that as Moscow warns of open armed conflict. Now, just talking about open armed conflict, period, not just with Ukraine. The United States rejected a ludicrous accusation from Russia that it was behind an alleged drone attack on the Kremlin, as Moscow's deputy foreign minister warned the two powers that an open armed conflict could happen. Relations between the U.S. and Russia are at their lowest since the Cold War, but in the aftermath of Wednesday's purported drone attack on the Kremlin, the official residence of the Russian president, Moscow has dramatically dialed up its rhetoric. When asked by CNN if Moscow believed that the United States was behind the attack, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, "Undoubtedly, such decisions, the definition of goals, the definition of means, all of this dictated to Kiev from Washington. We are well aware that decisions on such actions and such terrorist attacks are not made in Kiev, but in Washington. And Kiev is already executing what is told to do." Peskov did not provide any evidence of his claims nor any additional details regarding the alleged attack, saying that information would be released later. Earlier this week, Russia claimed that Ukraine launched a drone strike targeting the Kremlin in an attempt to assassinate Russian President Vladimir Putin, calling it a planned terrorist attack. John Kirby, the U.S. National Security Council coordinator for strategic communications, denied Russia's ludicrous claim that the U.S. directed Ukraine to carry out an alleged attack and kill Putin, and accused the president's spokesperson of lying. I would tell you Mr. Peskov is lying. I mean, it's obviously a ludicrous claim. Yeah, it's so ludicrous. The United States doesn't assassinate presidents. They said it was a ludicrous claim. The U.S. had nothing to do with this. We don't even know what happened here. That is just crazy to hear from anyone working for the U.S. government. We don't know what happened, just like they didn't know what happened with the Nord Stream pipeline. They don't know what happens with anything, despite the fact that the United States has the biggest and most powerful and secret intelligence agencies inside of the world, notably the CIA and other branches of national security offices. All of these things working in concert, multiple places around the world, multiple officers around the world. None of that matters because, hey, we don't know what happened here. It's not believable, obviously. But going forward, Russia doubled down on its bellicose rhetoric later Thursday when Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov told local media that relations between the U.S. and Russia are on the verge of an open armed conflict, meaning it's not, in his words, if it's an open armed conflict, then it's not the United States or not Russia fighting a proxy war with Ukraine that the United States is fighting, but it's actually Russia fighting the United States. And that would have a detrimental effect on not just people in other places. That would bring the battlefield home to you, those of you who are living in the United States. So these are some serious issues that are going on. What do I think is going to happen? I think that the war is coming. That's what I think. That's my opinion. I think the war is coming. The war is going to come, hit everyone. Like, it's going to be like, what the heck just happened? How we were just going by our normal business, enjoying our life, and going shopping and everything like that, and then all of a sudden we have the world's biggest superpowers, the United States, Russia, and I believe also China would be involved inside of the biggest war since World War II. So this is what I can see happening. But the question is, are you ready for this? Just like, are you ready for the financial meltdown and this happening? Hopefully, again, you're taking preparations with these stories and not taking them lightly. So with that, I think that wraps up this section of African World News. So now we're going to get ready for the next section, Hidden Revelations. Hope to see you there.
Okay, Reverend Jackson.
I hope that in our analysis of it, we don't conclude that we ain't winning. We're winning. There's going to be an election in South Africa a few months from now because we winning. There was a Middle East agreement signed on the White House lawn last Monday because we got the scars in our bodies. We're winning. We came here 30 years ago for the March on Washington. From Texas across to Florida up to Virginia, we couldn't use a single public toilet. We could not use a single hotel. We couldn't drink water from a single fountain. We did not have the right to vote. We didn't have a congressional black caucus. We didn't have 400 black mayors. We did not have the capacity to even think about foreign affairs, dealing in private survival. But just like when David knocked down Goliath, he couldn't go and party because Goliath wasn't no eunuch, he had some babies. And you knock down Jim Crow and you got Jim Crow Esquire. The giants keep coming. And so do not end up in a way you say, well, what can we do? Well, we, in fact, the laws that trapped South Africa of apartheid in 1948 came from here, from the 1896 laws. What Mandela is trying to do now is what we achieved in 1965. The fact is, we are winning, and our struggling has not been in vain, but there are some different options. For example, when Dr. King would make the case that we just end racism by law and get inside the plant gate with an education, we can grow. That was a period of economic growth. Now we get inside the plant, and the plant is closed. There's a very different context in which we operate. Zero economic growth among the industrial nations of the world is a factor in this. The economic downturn cannot be ignored. Lastly, we beat legislation with Jim Crow, but now Jim Crow Esquire regulation. The giants keep coming. And I would say lastly, Aristide is on his way back to Haiti because of us. Mandela got out of jail because of us. We're going to bring that matter to a resolution in Nigeria because of us. And now there will be an urban policy because we will not back down. So in the face of all of these challenges, do not assume that our struggles have been in vain and not productive.
I'll take some brief comments from Minister Farrakhan and Representative Waters and then go to your questions.
The scripture teaches, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. And it is ignorance that is the worst enemy of the rise of our people to fulfill our destiny. That ignorance is fed on by corrupt leadership. Now, the scripture again says, woe to the shepherds who feed themselves and not the flock. Should not the shepherds feed the flock? Most of our leaders are handpicked by the very enemy that we're trying to get free from. It's all right for us to say we have a voting rights bill and a public accommodations bill, and all of us, including myself, have benefited from those bills. But to get a public accommodations bill and a voting rights bill and then close black hotels because we sleep in white ones, or close black establishments so that we can spend our money with our oppressor, is not winning. Reverend Jackson, I submit. Wait. On one hand, we are winning because every one of these brilliant congresspersons, they represent us. They are brilliant men and women. These are brilliant people in front of us. But what good does it do to have a brilliant head not connected to a black body? I submit. That until and unless we as a mass connect with the Congressional Black Caucus and our black leaders connect to the black masses, and don't take your eye off the prize, because now you can sit in boardrooms and be media folk now, because little black people marched in the streets and suffered and went to jail to make openings for those of us who sit in leadership. Now we've got to unite at the top and develop strategies to free our people. Otherwise, we will be saying we're winning, but the masses keep losing. So if the masses keep losing, then we can't be winning unless our agenda is personal. We're looking for self-aggrandizing. But if we're looking for the liberation, if we want the liberation of our people, that ain't none of us winning until all of us become winners. Yeah.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back. So we're going to get started with our next segment, that is Hidden Revelations. Today we're going to talk about Africa being the Holy Land. I started off last week talking about the concept of what it means to be the Holy Land. Today we're going to talk about Israel. Today's modern state of Israel lies on a territory also known as Palestine. Today, that is regarded as the Holy Land by many, including people on the side of being the Arabs, people on the side of being the Jewish people. Other people around the world regard this particular land as the Holy Land. Now, we're going to talk about geography because Israel has been depicted as being separate and apart from Africa. But is that true, or is that something that has been a manipulation of the media? So let's get started. Check out this map of the globe. These are the regions of the world according to most commonly held definitions or most commonly believed perceptions of the world map. As you see when you zoom into the area known as Africa, Middle East, or Europe, that area is the part of the world we're going to be dealing with today. Now, you see connected to the continent of Africa, and by the way, there's a distinction of North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Well, there's another distinction also of Middle East. All of these distinctions are man-made. That is one thing that I want you to understand. The geography as we know it is something that literally comes out of the imagination of European map creators, the people who draw the borders, European states. All of them have political meanings. So whenever you say this is one continent, this is another continent, this is one country, this is another country, you might be deceived into thinking that these are geographical indicators of some type of separation, but that's just not the case. Historically, these borders have been changed, they've been rearranged, and they are everything that shows them to be arbitrary. Included in the arbitrariness is this region that we know today as the Middle East. Now, you might not know this. This term Middle East is actually a pretty recent invention. So, according to World Atlas, the term Middle East originated from the same European perspective that described Eastern Asia as the Far East. The Middle East denotes the transcontinental area between Western Asia and Egypt. It is comprised of 17 nations and an estimated population of 371 million people. Now, going on, it says the origin of the term Middle East is considered to be in the British India Office during the 1850s. That is correct. Prior to the 1850s, this term that we know as Middle East did not exist. It was popularized by Alfred Thayer Mahan, an American naval strategist who was referring to the region between Arabia and India in 1902. Mahan's definition of Middle East was the area around the Persian Gulf. Sir Ignatius Valentine Cherol further enlarged this definition to cater the Asian regions whose territories extended to India. Prior to the Second World War, another term, the Near East, denoted the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. In addition to regions centered around Turkey, the Middle East was used by the British while naming its command in Egypt in the 1930s. It was after this usage that the term became widely used in the West. And then in 1946, the Middle East Institute began operating in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. So that lets you know right there, literally the entire perspective, the entire concept of there being a place called the Middle East that doesn't even come from this region that we know of the Middle East. It doesn't come from this Arabian Peninsula. It doesn't come from that region at all. It actually comes from the West, comes from Europe and the United States, who have been the ones who dictate our language. This is very significant because we have to understand, how do these people see themselves? How does the geography show what this place is? Is this place really its own distinct area of the world, or is this a concept that really plays into the hands of certain individuals? Now, it's important to understand, when people say Middle East, they are talking about the countries Iraq, Iran, Cyprus, Oman, Egypt. That's right. If you accept the definition of, or the perspective of Middle East, you accept that Egypt, which we know is a part of Africa, is a part of the Middle East. Bahrain, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Palestine, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Israel, Syria, Kuwait, and Jordan. Some countries are occasionally added to the definition, such as Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. Other nations are quoted in the affairs of the Middle East, such as Pakistan, Afghanistan, Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. Meaning the term Middle East has been used anytime that it fits a certain narrative. The narrative being, these are separate people from the other people in this region, or this is a part of a continent that we're going to make distinct from the rest of the continent. Now, let's go back to where this concept comes from. You should know that the original maps of the world really show three regions, and these are the regions today that we would say are basically Europe, Asia, and Africa. These are the three regions that early ancient people who lived in these regions regarded as being the world. That was their world. Now, as we go on through history, we'll see different ways that these three regions were mapped. So if you look at this first map right here, this is Anaximanders, 610 to 546 BC map. This is one of the first world maps, one of the first maps known to map the world. As you see, you have Europe, Asia, and Libya. The continent of Africa by some was regarded as Libya, or that was the name given to it. Another map shows something similar. Again, you have from Hecataeus map, this is from 550 to 476 BC. You see Europe, you see Asia, you see Libya. And this is another map right here. Eratosthenes things. Forgive my pronunciation of these ancient names, but you have Europe, Asia, and you have Libya. And this one does make a small distinction when they say Arabia being somewhere in between. Now, notice there's nothing that says Middle East. There's nothing that even says that this is the line that we're going to start to draw. These lines weren't drawn by ancient people. These lines were drawn by people of today. But is it true that this area called the Middle East is something separate and apart from Africa? Would the people indigenous to this region feel like they were separate and apart from Africa? Do they feel like they're inside of their own region that's basically its own part of a continent? Do they feel that way? Well, it's important to also understand that geography tells a different story than what man tells. So I want you to look at this video right now. This video depicts what we know today as Pangea. If you see the world was once together, I think most people agree with that. This is a belief that I also hold. But at some point, different places started to split off. And if you notice, Africa and this place that we know of Arabia basically stayed together until the end. And you'll see that happen right here. So let's play the video again, just in case you didn't catch it. As you see, as the world started separating, going its different ways, you see, really almost to the very end, Africa and Arabia are literally connected. They're part of the same region. It really wasn't until the very end that you see there being a separation between Africa and Arabia. And not even a complete separation, because a lot of the separation that exists today is literally man-made. So this is very important to understand, because people who want you to think that Israel or that entire region of Arabia is located inside of Asia, that's the continent it's been labeled or it's been attributed to, the people are frankly lying. As we see, that region separated from Asia, was separated from Asia very early on, and didn't separate from Africa until very recently. That region is what we know as the East African Arabian Africa plate split. So let's talk about it. In East Africa, spreading processes have already torn Saudi Arabia away from the rest of the African continent, forming the Red Sea. The actively splitting African plate and the Arabian plate meet in what geologists call a triple junction, where the Red Sea meets the Gulf of Aden. A new spreading center may be developing under Africa along the East African Rift Zone. When the continental crust stretches beyond its limits, tension cracks begin to appear on the Earth's surface. Magma rises and squeezes through the widening cracks, sometimes to erupt and form volcanoes. The rising magma, whether or not it erupts, puts more pressure on the crust to produce additional fractures and ultimately the rift zone. So do your research. It's clear that the Arabian plate split from Asia very early on, whereas it just recently is splitting from Africa, whereas it's actually still connected. We should keep that in mind. So the idea that the Arabian plate should be considered Asia, you should question anyone as of why, and you should also question them as far as them saying it's Asia. Question them as far as at what point did it become Asia, because historically and geographically, it could not have been a part of the Asian continent. But let's go on to another issue. The issue of how do these continents get labeled? Who are the ones who basically decide that this is North America, this is South America, or this is going to be the Middle East, this is going to be Africa, this is going to be Asia? Who decides this? Of course, these are all arbitrary standards created, man-made created. Many of them are going to miss the mark. Many of them are going to not actually capture what it is that Yah created. And a reason that you can actually look to is the tectonic plates that show that the geography does not match the earth and how the earth moves and how the earth separates. Now, you might think tectonic plates are not significant. They actually are significant, not just inside of the continental driftway, but they also are significant as far as nature, and they're significant as far as distinctions between weather, so many ways that they actually do manifest into something real. And it's not just inside of the physical, but it's also inside of the spiritual, I would argue. Now, if you don't believe inside of the reality of tectonic plates, let's just watch this video real quick.
In between two of the islands of Indonesia, there's an ancient line that is both real and not real. You can't see it, but it's there all the same. If you stood on the coast of Bali and looked east to the shores of Lombok, you'd be staring right at the line's narrowest point, a 32-kilometer stretch of water that seems pretty unassuming. This invisible barrier weaves its way through the entire Malay archipelago, their largest collection of islands on the planet. See, on the western side, the animal life is characteristic of Asia, featuring rhinos, elephants, tigers, and woodpeckers, to name a few. But cross the line, and things suddenly change. You won't find those same species on the eastern side. Instead, the islands have a totally different cast of ecological characters, including marsupials, Komodo dragons, cockatoos, and honey.
So there you go. Tectonic plates are not some imaginary or figurative idea. They actually are real and concrete. While man decides to separate the world into these arbitrary borders that are meaningless, Yah has chosen to separate it in his way as far as how he would see that this place is going to be distinct from this place. And nature follows and nature shows. Now, let's go back to the region known as Arabia. As you see, inside of Arabia, which is a part of the African continent. If you look back in history, you'll also find out that the people who originally inhabited this region were black, melanated, or African people. So it's important for us to know that Israel as it exists today would have to be a part of Africa, not just Israel, but the entire Arabian area. Now, even though we went through all of this just to show that modern day Israel is Africa, I'm actually arguing on this channel and inside of this series that the place that we know today as Israel, the place that we call the Holy Land, that is not where the actual Holy Land is located. But for the purposes of this video, it's important for us to know that Israel, that region, the Palestinian struggle for freedom from this apartheid state is very much directly correlated to the African struggle of the entire continent. If you do not make a distinction between North Africa and quote-unquote sub-Saharan Africa as far as being a part of the struggle for liberation, you should also have the same feeling or the same connectedness to that area known as Arabia. But again, as far as the Holy Land, I argue that that is not the Holy Land. And we're going to get into that next week. The real Holy Land, where is it? Where is it located? Next week, we're going to go over a video that's going to explain very clearly, using the scriptures, where the actual Holy Land is located. And then I'm going to go into some other scriptures that really do specifically lay out the exact Holy Land and will explain so much about why this particular region of the world is always under siege. So for now, we'll leave it at that. I will see you all in the next segment, and please do enjoy this break.
I unequivocally rejected the racist assumption of much white American Christianity, namely that God had created the black man inferior and that he had intended Negroes to be a servant class, hewers of wood and drawers of water. Well, I predicated my view of man on the doctrine of Imago Dei. All men, regardless of color, are created in the image of God. Now, from this premise follow the equality of all men and the brotherhood of all men. The biblical injunction of Acts 17:26 reminds us that he created of one blood all nations of men that dwell on the face of the earth. I was most interested in brotherhood within his own race, because if Negroes are created in God's image and Negroes are black, then God must in some sense be black. If the white man has the idea of a white God, let him worship his God as he desires. We have found a new ideal, because whilst our God has no color, and yet it is human to see everything through one's own spectacles. And since the white people have seen their God through their white spectacles, we have only now started to see our God through our own spectacles. Because the time has come for the black man to forget his hero worship of other races and to create and emulate heroes of his own. We must canonize our own saints, create our own martyrs, and elevate the positions of fame and honor black men and women who have made a distinct contribution to our racial history. Sojourner Truth is worthy of a place of sainthood alongside the Joan of Arc. Crispus Attucks and George William Gordon are entitled to the halo of martyrdom with no less glory than the martyrs of any other race. Toussaint Louverture's brilliancy as a soldier or a statesman outshone that of any other people. Hence he's entitled to the highest place as a hero among men. Because Africa's created millions and countless millions of black men and women in war and peace, whose luster and bravery outshone that of any other people. So why not see good and perfection in ourselves? We must inspire our literature and promulgate the doctrine of our own without any apologies to the powers that be. That's right, that's how it can go. Let sentiments and cross opinions go to the winds. We are entitled to our own opinion and are not obligated to or bound by the opinions of others. If others laugh at you, return the laughter to them. If they mimic you, return the compliment with equal force. Because they have no more right to dishonor, discredit you in manhood than you have in dealing with them. Honor them when they honor you. Disrespect and disregard them when they vilely treat you. Their arrogance is but skin deep, an assumption that has no foundation in morals or in law. They have sprung from the same family tree of obscurity as we have. Their history is as rude in its primitiveness as ours. Their ancestors were running wild in living in trees of branches like monkeys as ours. They made human sacrifices, ate the flesh of their own dead and wild meat from beasts for centuries, even as they have accused us of doing. Their cannibalism is more prolonged than ours. When we were embracing the banks of the Nile, they were still drinking blood out of the skulls of their conquered dead. After our civilization had reached the noonday of progress, they were still living in holes with bats, rats, and other insects and animals. After we had already unfathomed the mystery of the stars and reduced the heavenly constellation to minute and regular calculus, they were still backwoodsmen living in ignorance and in blatant darkness. The world is indebted to us for the benefits of civilization. They stole our arts and sciences from Africa. Then why should we be ashamed of ourselves? Let no one inoculate you with evil doctrines to suit his own convenience. Charity begins at home. So first to thyself be true, and thou canst not then depart to no man. Because God and nature first made us what we are. Never forget your God. Remember that we live, work, and pray for a binding racial hierarchy, whose only natural, spiritual, and political limits shall be God and Africa at home and abroad. With God's dearest blessings, I leave you for a while. One love.
Greetings, everyone. This is the African Exodus show, and this segment is Set Apart. Right now, I am in my kitchen. I wanted to do this segment at nighttime because this is my nightly routine. It's been my routine since I've been in Ghana, and that is to eat a bulb of garlic every night. Now, I wanted to do it at nighttime, but it's daytime because I was too tired last night, but it's okay. We can set the mood being that it's late at night, my kids are asleep, husband's probably asleep, and I want to take a bulb of garlic basically for the health reasons. Now, what I do basically every night is you always crush your garlic, and crushing it also helps the bulb be a lot more easier to peel. This one's growing a little bit because it's a little bit old. It's been in the fridge for a while, but it will still be fine. And essentially what you do is cut it, and I cube it very small because I basically want to swallow everything whole. And then I put it inside of a cup that I'm going to drink out of, and it might be this cup. Basically put the garlic in, I add a little bit of water, and I let it sit for about 10 minutes because you want it to sit for 10 minutes for a compound known as allicin to basically develop. Now you might be saying, Tierney, why do you take garlic? Why did you randomly start taking garlic when you came to Ghana? There's a lot of benefits of garlic. I'll list some on the screen. The big ones for me was that, number one, it helps with your digestion. Another one is that it is antibacterial. Now, this actually was very important for me at different points where I've dealt with having certain infections and no medicine was working, because one thing that you should know about antibiotics is that antibiotics will not just kill bad bacteria, but it will also kill good bacteria. And so I actually discovered garlic pills, whenever I was in the US, and that was one of the things that actually helped me way more than antibiotics, because it doesn't kill your bad bacteria. You still have, or your good bacteria. You still have your good bacteria, and your bad bacteria is killed. So that was something that I figured out on my own just by experimenting and looking at things on the internet. But now, really not just antibacterial, antifungal, also something like mosquitoes. That's something that I had dealt with when we first came here, is that I got bit up all over, like the second night we stayed at our house. And I basically started doing garlic, and I haven't had a lot of mosquito bites. I don't know if I've had any. I haven't noticed any. So these are just some benefits. There's so many more. Like I said, I'll list them on the screen. And the reason why I want to advocate this to you is because there's many remedies that are put out there for us, many things that we're told that this is the best way to take care of your body. But a lot of times we're not looking in nature. So actually, let's go to a video where I'm going to talk about the origin of Western medicine and why we have to instead go back to looking for natural medicine. After that video, I'm going to give you all a recipe for cough medicine that I think would be useful to you.
The Rockefeller family have been major influencers of the scientific and medical community. John D. Rockefeller is known as the father of modern medicine, for those who look deeper than what they are mind-controlled to know. With his deep pockets, he exerted his control. So before we talk about the present and what they currently show on this website, let's go a century back. Let's talk about modern Western medicine. What medicine is like today is not what it was like centuries ago. Doctors used to practice healing through the natural. Our Father created a world that has the natural resources that were able to give us what our bodies needed to heal.
That is an important aspect, I think, whenever you are talking to people who want to defend the modern medicine and say, well, God created modern medicine. Well, no, y'all actually created the herbs and the earth and things that are actually there for us, things that we don't have to do chemical combustions in order to create. This is what he created. So if he created this, then what is this alternative to his creation that we're told is more perfect? Many of which has many side effects and things that we could kind of figure out is probably not the best option, but because we're told this is what's best, we'll just go with it. So let's listen some more.
Natural and herbal medicines were very popular in America during the early 1900s. Almost one half the medical colleges and doctors in America were practicing holistic medicine, using extensive knowledge from Europe and Native American traditions. But in the 20th century, all that changed. John D. Rockefeller, the wealthiest man in the history of America, was a huge proponent of this change. And most people don't even know of his influence. Most people don't even know of him. By the turn of the 20th century, Rockefeller controlled 90% of all petroleum refineries in America through ownership of his company, Standard Oil Corporation. His company, Standard Oil, was later split into smaller companies, Mobil, Chevron, Exxon, etc., making the family even wealthier. In the beginning of the 20th century, the 1900s, the science world was getting excited about new petrochemicals and the ability to create a variety of new compounds from oil. Some of the first products derived from petrochemicals were plastics, but organic chemists knew that oil had the potential to create far more than plastic bags.
This is a very important aspect because one thing, first of all, I didn't know this at all. I don't know if you knew that plastic came from oil. But if you look at what's happening as far as a lot of people who are getting negative health effects basically from simple things like using plastics, these things are not something that's naturally created for us. These are things that man created inside of a lab. So whenever you think of something like heated plastic that gets into your food or into your water, this is the origins, basically, the fact that you can turn oil into something like plastic.
With all the research done, it was found that drugs could be produced from petroleum. So the world's top oil man, who controlled the petroleum market, decided to use his influence to change the medical industry. In the early 1900s, there were a variety of doctors and healing methods in America. Some of the medical specialties included chiropractic, naturopathy, homeopathy, holistic medicine, and herbal medicine. To eliminate the competition, Rockefeller used his massive wealth and influence and changed the game. Rockefeller purchased part of the German pharmaceutical company IG Farben. You can look up this company's involvement in World War II. There's a lot to say about them. They're now known as Bayer. He hired a contractor named Abraham.
This is just a lot to me to be emphasized. I'm sorry I keep breaking this up, but this is a very important aspect of the fact that, number one, our medicine became something for profit. Our medicine became something that needed to eliminate competition. If you think about the medical pharmaceutical industry today, most of us are willing to admit that the pharmaceutical industry is completely corrupt, but we're not willing to admit that the whole idea of having medicine as something as a part of our market, as opposed to something that anyone can access literally from nature, that whole change, or the change of the dialogue, has really played into the hands of these pharmaceuticalists and also of these doctors, different entities that are using this as a way to gain capital. So when you think or you want to defend modern medicine or Western medicine, ask yourself, can you separate Western medicine from capitalism? Can you separate Western medicine from the idea of having markets and competition with each other, not looking out for your health, but looking out for what they could get out of you basically having a health issue?
Abraham Flexner, and Flexner submitted a report to Congress in 1910. This is known as the Flexner Report. This report concluded that there were too many doctors and medical schools in America, and that all the natural healing methods which had existed for hundreds of years were now unscientific quackery. Medicines used for thousands of years were now classified as alternative, and the new petroleum-based patentable drugs were declared the gold standard. And then, gaining more control, Rockefeller then took control of the American Medical Association. And through that report that Abraham Flexner submitted to Congress, he called for a standardization of medical information. Based on the report, Congress acted upon Flexner's recommendations and changed laws related to medical practice. With these legal changes in place, Rockefeller teamed up with Andrew Carnegie and started funding medical schools all over America on the strict condition that they only taught their curriculum. The medicine that he was in control of was now the standard of medicine. Through the power of their huge grants, this powerful team systematically dismantled the previous curriculum of these medical schools, removing any mention of the healing power of herbs or natural treatments. Teachings on diet and other natural, non-drug treatments were also completely removed from medical programs. Any mention of their healing power was erased from the medical textbooks. Medicine was changed from wellness and prevention to simply treatment. You're ill? Take 2 of these and call me in the morning. We were moved from using the solutions Father gave us to heal us
and that is essential. And this is why we're going to talk about this today. As far as why we need alternative medicine, or really the true word holistic medicine, forgive me for even saying alternative medicine, why we need holistic medicine is because the medical industry as it exists was not for us. It was for profit. It was for empowering institutions that were not there for us, but were there to basically have a monopoly on information. It's not things that we want to promote. So if we're actually looking to be separate and set apart, can we simply go with buying certain things when we know that there are alternatives in nature, and we know that there are better options inside of nature, things that actually were created for us? While you basically want to go automatically to a man to get your health taken care of, go to a man to take care of your issues. Here you are with all these options created by Yah that you could just easily access. So this is why I would really advocate that the idea of medicine, holistic medicine, things we can find in nature, being something that we should focus on and try to seek out, is something that is absolutely detrimental to us if we can't do it now while we still have time to do that research. And if we don't do it, we're going to basically be inside of a situation where we're dependent on a system that does not love us to give us medicine that's not even for our own good. Okay, everyone, this is the recipe I'm going to show you. Very easy, very simple. This is a cough medicine recipe. It's not cough season. It's not cold season right now. And even here in Ghana, I'm not even going to make it in front of you because I'm not of the impression that I'll have a cold anytime soon. But I'm going to give this to you. Maybe if you start feeling something coming on, this is something you can do that is natural and a very good way to take care of any issues you're having. So all you really need is 3 bulbs of garlic, and an onion, and some raw natural honey. And literally, I'll show you all 3 together. Literally, all you're going to do is you're going to dice up the garlic and put it into a jar. This is a mason jar. And you dice up the onion, you put that into a jar, and you add 1 cup of honey. You let it sit for, they say, about 15 hours. So this is something that you're not going to do instantly, but just let it sit for a little bit. Let it basically resonate, and all of these antibacterial properties will be available to you. Both garlic, onion, and honey have much natural remedies that are very helpful to people who are sick. So I hope that's just an easy, quick tip. If something were to happen, you don't have access to your medical store or your pharmacy, look inside of nature, look at your local market, and make your own medicines, because you have to know how to take care of your body without any help from anyone else. So with that, we're actually going to get ready for the next segment that I believe should be weather forecast. So please go ahead over to that segment. I will see you all after the break.
As you see, the topic for today is the Romanization of Christ and Christianity. The Romanization of Christ and Christianity. Before going any further, let's be clear on what we mean by the Romanization. All right? At the time, people, that the Jesus of the Bible walked the earth. And notice how I'm saying that the Jesus of the Bible walked the earth. The world was under the dominion or under the rule of the Greco-Roman culture. And the reason why we always connect those 2 words is because they were virtually synonymous. Okay, the areas were geographically right next to each other, Rome and Greece. And they were the 2 powers of the then known world among the Europeans. And the power not only extended from Europe, but it actually extended all the way down into Africa as well. All right? And we need to understand that. So therefore, all of the teachings, all of the concepts, all of the belief systems that were put into the people came from the tenets or the basis of Rome and Greece. All right, we need to understand the power of Rome. Rome is the most powerful entity on this planet. Please understand that. And when I say Rome, I really, to even narrow it down some more, we mean the Roman Catholic Church in particular. There is no entity on this planet as powerful as the Roman Catholic Church. Now, a lot of people literally think that the Roman Church is not that powerful, but that countries are powerful. Well, brothers and sisters, let me tell you what's more powerful than a person's political perspective. What is more powerful than a person's political or national perspective is their religious perspective. The Romanization of Christ is something that took place in the 4th century AD. All right? At the Council of Nicaea. That's when it began. You may want to write that down. The Nicene Council. All right? And you see I think I do have in today's notes, the Nicene Creed on page 2, and we'll get to that, which is the creed that was the result of what was decided at the Nicene Council. Okay? And of course, the Roman Emperor Constantine was over the Nicene Council. He was the emperor. He was the ruler. He was the HNIC at that time. Okay? And what Constantine said is what went. Anybody who disagreed with Constantine was dealt with in a very harsh way. It was not popular to go against Constantine. All right?
Many Bible believers today have followed tradition handed down by previous generations. They believe and were taught that Sunday is the proper day of worship, that the Savior changed the day of worship from the Jewish Sabbath to Sunday. The adoption of Sunday as the Christian Sabbath has little to do with the Bible and everything to do with Constantine the Great over 300 years after the Messiah's death. Constantine was emperor of the Roman Empire from 306 to 337 CE. He was a sun worshipper who on his deathbed converted to Christianity. In 321 CE, while still a sun worshipper, Constantine established Sunday as the day of worship. He decreed,
"On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed."
In this coin circulated by Constantine in 317 CE, we see the face of Constantine on one side, and on the other the figure of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. The sun god was also known as Mithras, and his birth was on December 25th. This date was adopted as the birth of Christ and became the date for Christmas many centuries later. Clearly, Constantine was an avid worshipper of the sun god Sol Invictus. Amazingly, Martin Luther, the champion of the modern-day Protestant movement, said,
"They allege that the Sabbath changed into Sunday, the Lord's Day, contrary to the Decalogue as it appears. Neither is there any example more boasted of than the changing of the Sabbath day. Great, say they, is the power and authority of the Church, since it dispensed with one of the 10 Commandments."
We need to understand this thing. This is serious. Yeah, buddy. So Constantine went on to defeat his rivals and became the Holy Roman Emperor Constantine, who has been portrayed in all his regal robes, celebrating Christian rights and declaring himself a Christian, yet still tolerating the pagan cults of the day, using them all as a means to his political ends of unifying the empire. And guess what? And to this day, Constantine is remembered for, quote, freeing the Christians and Christianizing the empire. In fact, he Romanized Christ and Christianity. The degree to which Constantine sought to synthesize Christianity and paganism, and when we say synthesize, we mean to blend them together. All right? He literally took his pagan beliefs of sun worship. All right? He believed in the sun god Sol Invictus. In fact, it was Constantine who decreed that Sunday should be the day of worship, or in Latin, dies solis, the day of the sun. And that's how we end up with Sun's Day, which we now call
Greetings, everyone. This is our fourth and final segment, Weather Forecast, where we go into different prophetic revelations that can be found using scripture. Today, we're going to talk about the fate of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church being an institution that has been around for far longer than basically many institutions aside of the world. This is an institution that at one time looked to be close to conquering the entire world. This institution has been intact for a long time. It was around figuratively at a certain time, but now it has manifested and become its own state, a city that sits on 7 hills. We're going to talk about that city, Rome. We're going to talk about the Vatican, and we're going to talk about their destiny according to Scripture. Just giving you the end of the presentation, basically spoiler alert, it's not going to be a good end. And for that reason, let's talk about why we have to discuss this institution. This is not me picking on anyone who's a Catholic. This is not me picking on people who are a part of the Catholic Church. But this is talking about the truth. The truth is that this institution was corrupt from the beginning. This institution was an intentional effort to derail the gospel of Christ, to change is to change the meaning and to turn it into something else. This something else, though, believe it or not, was actually prophesied about inside of Scripture long before the Catholic Church became the power that it is today, or even existed. So let's talk about this. First, we're going to talk about the crimes of the Catholic Church. The reason why I want to start with this is because I want you to understand I'm not picking on Catholics for the heck of it. There's actually a long history of violence and of persecution and of colonialism and of co-signing the transatlantic slave trade. This institution has been around for a long time, and probably more than any other institution in the world has more blood on its hands. So this institution, known as the Catholic Church, has killed tens of millions of people all over the course of history through wars, massacres, through colonialism, through persecution campaigns, all of the above. They also co-opted what we know today of Christianity. Christianity, the message that came from the apostles of Yeshua, these apostles went into the world to share a good message. But that message was very much co-opted from an early stage. And that co-optation, believe it or not, was actually predicted and prophesied in Scripture. Now, they changed the message into one that would give them power. Now we have understanding when we say Christianity that we're talking about people who use and manipulate the Scriptures, manipulate the sacrifice of Yeshua for their own power. They also did something that many of us have noticed probably, whether it's from the holidays or from the imagery. That is, they have mixed this word, Christianity, they've mixed this faith with Babylonian religion. Something else we'll get into. I would argue that this is actually the biggest co-op in history because literally every single thing that you might associate with being Christianity has nothing to do with the people who actually taught it originally, with the Messiah who actually died, has nothing to do with that. Everything from the holidays, everything from the crosses, everything from these saints that we see, so many aspects of what we call Christianity have, again, nothing to do with the actual gospel. So let's talk about the history of that co-optation. And all the sources that I took for this presentation will be in the description. Today we're going from a discussion that was on the cross, or what we call the crucifix. The story of the cross as a religious symbol begins in, no, it doesn't begin in the Bible, it doesn't begin in Jerusalem, it actually begins in ancient Babylon. Upon Nimrod's death, his wife Semiramis exalted her infant son Tammuz as Nimrod reborn. God-king worship became quickly entrenched among the ancient Babylonians in the Tau symbol. The first character of Tammuz name became a key symbol in Babylonian worship. It is historically undisputable that the Tau was an integral part of pagan religious worship and pre-Christian culture. The cross was sewn into pagan priest costumes, worn by Vestal virgins, and adorned pagan temples. Now, the Tau various forms such as the T, and would sometimes incorporate a circle representing the sun, an integral part of the Babylonian mystery religion. Various names including Marduk, Baal, Beelzebub. Baal worship, a continuation of the Babylonian religion, was what God rebuked ancient Israel for when they did evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. It was in service to this pagan deity that ancient Israel sacrificed their infant children as burning sacrifices. This is listed in Jeremiah 32:35. Baal worship was a terrible abomination in God's sight, but Nimrod worship spread throughout the ancient world. Nimrod, reborn as Tammuz, was associated with the Tau symbol and the pre-Christian pagan worship of the ancient Babylonians, Orientals, Philistines, and Egyptians. So many things that we don't necessarily question, but they don't come, again, from the message. They don't come from the Scripture. They come directly from the pagan world. So here we go. This is a description. It says that over time, the pagan Roman emperor became the Pope. The pagan Roman Senate became the College of Cardinals. The pagan Roman imperial governors became the archbishops. The pagan Roman provincial governors became the bishops. The pagan Roman civitas became the priests. The pagan Roman Vestal virgins became the nuns. And with that, the Roman Catholic Church was up and running. All of this provides significant background information as we make our way into Revelation 17. By the way, this came from another source that will be listed in the description. So we set a foundation as far as what the Roman Catholic Church is and what they did as far as taking over and co-opting the message of the truth, the message of the sacrifice of Yeshua. They co-opted it from a very early stage to the point where people, when they hear Christian, they don't even think of the actual message. They think of these people in their robes. They think of the people who are offsprings of them, that is the Protestant Church. Things have been so co-opted to a point where most people have actually absolutely no idea as far as what the actual message is. So, as I said, this was predicted inside of the Bible. This was predicted inside of Scripture, particularly in the book of Revelations. We're going to read from Revelation 17. Let's get started with Then one of the angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, "Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of sexual immorality, and those who live on the earth became drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality. And he carried me away into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemies, names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls, holding in her hand a cup full of abominations and of unclean things of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the world. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the witnesses of Yeshua. When I saw her, I wondered greatly, and the angel said to me, Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman, of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10. Going to verse 18. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who live on the earth, whose names have been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits. And there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he remains a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an 8th and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. And he said to me, The waters which you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples and multitudes, and nations and languages. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these will hate the prostitute and will make her desolate and naked. And they will eat her flesh and will burn her up with fire. For Yahuwah has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast, until the words of Yah are fulfilled. The woman whom you saw was the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Okay, so many things that we should talk about as far as this, how this goes. Number 1, you hear prophecy of a woman who's on the beast. This woman, we know, is not just a person, it's also a geographical location, and we know this because we're told by scripture that she sits on 7 mountains. Very relevant where the Vatican is located. As you see, Rome. I'll probably pronounce these wrong, but let's give it a go. Kernernau, Viminal, Capitoline, Escaline, Palatine, Celian, and Aventine. These are the 7 hills of Rome. And as you see, the city of Rome sits on 7 hills. No other city in this world actually matched this description. So that's one indicator that Rome, the Vatican, the Catholic Church is the one who's being talked about in Scripture. Now, Some people believe, and I do not say this definitively, but I do think it's interesting, where the scripture also talks about that this represents 7 kings, that these are the last 7 popes, and the 8th being the current pope. So as you see, since the Catholic Church the Vatican, since it became a separate state, as you know, Rome is basically a city-state. Since that date, there have been 7 popes and 1 currently, right? So if you go from the 7 popes and go to the current pope, he would match the description of the 8th king, they say, the one who's basically going to hand over all power to the beast. Now, this would mean that the current pope, if this is true, if this interpretation is true, that would mean that the current pope will be the last pope. Many people are advancing that that is the case. I say it could be the case. Certainly, if it is the case, that means that there's not a lot of time left. In fact, the Protestant Reformation did not wipe out the teachings of the Catholic Church. Many of them passed on. They might have gotten rid of some of the most asinine aspects of the religious worship, but they did not get rid of them all. And so much of the Protestant faith also comes from paganism. So we should understand that that's not just the Catholic Church. It's the church worldwide. That is the multitude of nations, the peoples, all of which have basically been taken in by this whore Babylon. I just want to give you some images because there's a lot of evidence that the Vatican and the Catholic Church puts out that will show you that they really don't worship Yah. They really don't worship Yeshua. As you see right here, this is the benediction hand gesture. And if you look to the left, you will see that is a Baphomet. Now, I'm not going to assume you know what Baphomet is, although many of you probably do, but just in case you don't, Baphomet is the incarnation of Lucifer. Baphomet is basically the entity that was worshipped by the Knights Templar. Knights Templar later on become the Freemasons and basically are ingrained to many of the things in our society today. And as you see, Baphomet, the Baphomet symbol has the hands pointing up and then the hands down below. What this represents is as above, so down below. Now, as you see, the Catholic Church consistently has done this hand gesture, and they've depicted their Jesus, because their Jesus is not Yeshua, but they've depicted their Jesus as doing these same hand gestures. Is it a coincidence? Let's look at some more imagery. I know what these symbols are. These are, of course, the Satan symbols. These symbols are well known throughout the world to be representations of Lucifer. Now, is this a coincidence? Or if you look to the far right, is the 666 symbol that the Pope right there is doing with his hands a coincidence? I would argue not. But let's say it is a coincidence and go to these next images. If you look right here, you'll see some more imagery coming from the Vatican. There's so much, honestly. I could not find it all. I could not show everything I could find, but these are some big ones. So if you see to the far left, this is actually an auditorium inside of the Vatican. And you will see that the auditorium appears as a serpent. Look to the right. What you will see is an aerial view of the Vatican. As you see from an aerial view, and if you don't see it clearly, the image next to it to the right actually show it with some color. That is a serpent. You know, most people can see that is clearly a serpent. And at that, from the shape of it, it would appear a serpent that is actually carrying something or pregnant with something. So that is going directly to prophecy if you think about the role of the Catholic Church. That is to hand over all authority to the beast. Here's the last images I want to show. So if you see, this is their Messiah. This is the Jesus that they have taught to the world. And their Messiah is not our Messiah. We know that this image, this representation has nothing to do with Christ, right? If you do look to the right, you see also their image of what they say is basically Christ rising from hell. Nothing of this actually comports with who Christ is or what he did. Another image showing that the person that they're worshiping is not the person of the Bible, not the person of the scripture. And then I just want to go back to the first slide. I showed you something right here. This is the Pope's coat of arms. And if, as you see, this is actually a fleur-de-lis. We're going to get into fleur-de-lis a little bit later, but know that fleur-de-lis have a lot of meaning behind them, and their meanings are not something that is good. A lot of it goes right to Babylon. A lot of it goes right to Babylonian worship. We also know fleur-de-lis were actually what the French used to brand Africans, particularly in the state of Louisiana. I would say that's for a reason, but we'll get into that in another video. Back to the purpose of this presentation, the fate of the Catholic Church. If you look in Scripture, particularly in Revelation 17, Vatican, they're going to turn against the harlot. They're going to turn against this incarnate of the world system. They're going to turn against her because she's no longer useful to them. Because we know that in the end, going to be one person, one entity that's going to be worshipped, and there's not going to be room for this entity of the Catholic Church or the Vatican any longer. So that's basically the future that is prophesied about the Catholic Church, that it will be made desolate, naked, and the world will eat her flesh up and burn her with fire. Hope you all enjoyed this episode. I will see you all in the next one.